Welcome back, and welcome to the second book of allegorical interpretation by Philo. Um, I think it's safe to say that Philo has a lot to say about Adam and Eve and the garden because he has began both the creation account and the first book of Allegory dealing with this issue. Book 2 is no different. Philo once again returns to the account of the Garden of Eden, but adds even more new information as he begins Book 2. And he has this to say as we begin. And the Lord God said, It is not good for man to be alone. Let us make him a helpmeet for him. Why, O prophet, is it not good for man to be alone? Because, says he, it is good that he who is alone should be alone. But God is alone, and by himself, being one. And there is nothing like unto God. So that, since it is good that he who only has a real existence should be alone, for that which is about itself alone is good, it cannot be good for man to be alone. But the fact of God being alone, one may receive in this sense, that neither before the creation was there anything with God, nor since the world has been created is anything placed in the same rank with him, for he is in need of absolutely nothing whatever. But the better way of understanding this passage is the following. God is alone, a single being, not a combination, a single nature, but each of us, and every other animal in the world, are compound beings. For instance, I myself am made up of many things, of soul and body. Again, the soul is made up of a rational part and an irrational part. Also of the body there is one part hot, another cold, one heavy, another light, one dry, another moist. But God is not a compound being, nor one which is made up of many parts, but one which has no mixture with anything else. For whatever could be combined with God must be either superior to him, or inferior to him, or equal to him. But there is nothing equal to God, and nothing superior to him, and nothing is combined with him which is worse than himself. For if it were, he himself would be deteriorated. And if he were to suffer deterioration, he would also become perishable, which it is impious even to imagine. Therefore, God exists according to oneness and unity, or we should rather say that oneness exists according to the one God. For all number is more recent than the world, as is also time. But God is older than the world, and is its creator. But it is not good for any man to be alone, for there are two kinds of men, the one made according to the image of God, the other fashioned out of the earth, for it longs for its own likeness. For the image of God is the antitype of all other things, and every imitation aims at this of which it is the imitation, and is placed in the same class with it. And it is not good for either the man who was made according to the image of God to be alone, nor is it any more desirable for the factitious man to be alone. And indeed it is impossible, for the external senses, and the passions, and the vices, and innumerable other things are combined with and adapted to the mind of this man. But the second kind of man has a helpmeet for him, who in the first place is created. For I will make him, says God, a helpmeet for him. And in the second place is younger than the object to be helped. For first of all, God created the mind, and subsequently he prepares to make its helper. But all this is spoken allegorically, in accordance with the principles of natural philosophy. For external sensation and the passions of the soul are all younger than the soul, and how they help it we shall see hereafter. But at present we will consider the fact of their being helpers younger than the object helped. As, according to the most skilful physicians and natural philosophers, the heart appears to be formed before the rest of the body, after the manner of the foundation of a house, or the keel of a ship, and then the rest of the body is built upon it, on which account, even after death, the physicians say that the heart still quivers, as having been created before the rest of the body, and being destroyed after it. So also does the dominant portion of the soul appear to be older than the whole of the soul, and the irrational part to be younger, the formation of which Moses has not yet mentioned, but he is about to give a sketch of it, how the irrational part of the soul is the external sensation, and the passions which spring from it, especially if the judgments are our own. And this assistant of God is younger and created, being thus described with perfect propriety. But now let us see how that part, which was postponed before, acts as an assistant. How does our mind comprehend that such and such a thing is black or white, unless it employs sight as its assistant? And how does it know that the voice of man who is singing to his harp is sweet, or on the contrary, out of tune, if it has not the assistance of the faculty of hearing to guide it? And how can it tell that exhalations are fragrant or foul-smelling, unless it makes use of the sense of smell as its ally? How, again, does it judge of the different flavors, except through the instrumentality of its assistant, taste? How can it distinguish between what is rough and what is smooth, except by touch? There is also another class of assistants, as I have already said, namely, the passions. For pleasure also is an assistant, cooperating towards the durability of our race. And in like manner, concupiscence and pain and fear, biting the soul, lead it to treat nothing with indifference. Anger, again, is a defensive weapon, which has been of great service to many people, and so too have the other passions in the same manner, on which account Moses has said with great felicity that he was an assistant to himself, for he is in reality an assistant to the mind, as if he were its brother and near kinsman. For the external sensations and the passions are part of one soul, and are its offspring. Now of assistants there are two kinds, the one consisting in the passions, and the other in the sensations. But the prior kind is that of generation, for Moses says, "And God proceeded and made all the beasts of the field out of the earth, and all the birds of heaven, and he brought them to Adam to see what he would call them. And whatever Adam called any living soul, that became its name." You see here who are our assistants, the beasts of the soul, the passions. For after God had said, "I will make him a helpmeet for him," Moses adds subsequently, "He made the beasts," as if the beasts also were assistants to us. But these are not, properly speaking, assistants, but are called so only in a catachrestic manner, by a kind of abuse of language. For they are found in reality to be enemies to man, as also in the case of cities, the allies turn out at times to be traitors and deserters, and in the case of friendship, flatterers are found to be enemies instead of companions. And Moses here speaks of the heaven and the field synonymously, describing the mind in this allegorical manner. For the mind, like the field, has innumerable periods of rising and budding forth, and, like the heaven, has brilliant and divine and happy characteristics of nature. But the passions he compares to beasts and birds, because they injure the mind, being untamed and wild, and because after the manner of birds they descend upon the intellect, for their onset is swift and difficult to withstand, and the word besides, as attached to he made, is not superfluous. Why so? Because he has previously said that the beasts were formed before the creation of man, and he shows it in the following words, which are an account of what was done on the sixth day. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures after their kind, 4-footed animals, and creeping things, and wild beasts." Why then is it that he makes other animals now? not being content with those already existing. Now this must be stated according to the principles of moral philosophy. The species of evil are abundant in created man, so that the most evil things are continually produced in him. And this other thing must be affirmed on principles of natural philosophy. First of all, in the 6 days he created the different kinds of passions and the ideas, but now in addition to them he is creating the species, on which account Moses says, and besides he made, and that what had been previously created were genera is plain from what he says, let the earth bring forth living souls, not according to species, but according to genus. And this is found to be the course taken by God in all cases. For before making the species, he completes the genera, as he did in the case of man. For having first modeled the generic man, in whom they say that the male and female sexes are contained, he afterwards created the specific man, Adam. This, therefore, he denominated the species of assistance. But the other part of the creation, the description, that is, of the formation of the external sensations, was postponed till he began to form the woman. And having put off this, he then gives an account of the distribution of names. And this is an explanation, partly figurative and partly literal, which is worthy of our admiration. It is literal, inasmuch as the lawgiver has attributed the imposition of names to the firstborn man. For those also among the Greeks who study philosophy say that they were wise men who first gave names to things. But Moses speaks more correctly in the first place, because he attributes this giving of names not to some of those men who lived in early times, but to the first man who was created upon the earth, so that, just as he himself was created to be the beginning of creation to all other animals, he might also be considered the beginning of conversation and language. For if there were no such things as names, there could be no such thing as language. And secondly, because, if many different persons gave names, they must have been different and devoid of all connection, since different persons would have given different names. But if only one person did so, the name given by one was sure to be adapted to the thing, and the same name was likely to be a token to every one of the existing things signified by it. But the moral meaning of this passage is as follows. We often use the expression tie instead of dia tie. Why? As when we say, why, tie, have you washed yourself? Why, tie, are you walking? Why, tie, are you conversing? For in all these cases, tie is used instead of diatai. When therefore Moses says, to see what he would call them, you must understand him as if he had said diatai, why, instead of tie, what. And the mind will invite and embrace each of these meanings. Is it then only for the sake of what is necessary that the mortal race is of necessity implicated in passions and vices? Or is it also on account of that which is immoderate and superfluous? And again, is it because of the requirements of the earth-born man, or because the mind judges them to be most excellent and admirable things? As, for instance, is it necessary for every created thing to enjoy pleasure? But the bad man flies to pleasure as to a perfect good. But the good man seeks it only as a necessary, for without pleasure nothing whatever is done among the human race. Again, the bad man considers the acquisition of riches as the most perfect good possible, but the good man looks upon riches only as a necessary and useful thing. Very naturally, therefore, God desires to see and to learn how the mind denominates and appreciates each of these things, whether it looks upon them as good, or as things indifferent, or as evil in themselves, but nevertheless in some respects necessary. On which account, thinking that everything which he invited towards himself and embraced as a living soul was of equal value and importance with the soul, This became the name, not only of the thing which was thus invited, but also of him who invited it. As, for instance, if the man embraced pleasure, he was called a man devoted to pleasure. If he embraced appetite, he was called a man of appetite. If he invited intemperance, he himself also acquired the name of intemperate. If he admitted cowardice, he was called cowardly, and so on in the case of the other passions. For as he who has any distinctive qualities according to the virtues is called from that virtue with which he is especially endowed, prudent, or temperate, or just, or courageous, as the case may be, so too in respect of the vices, a man is called unjust, or foolish, or unmanly, when he has invited and embraced these habits of mind and conduct. And God cast a deep trance upon Adam, and sent him to sleep. And he took one of his ribs, and so on. The literal statement conveyed in these words is a fabulous one, for how can any one believe that a woman was made of a rib of a man, or in short, that any human being was made out of another? And what hindered God as he made man out of the earth from making woman in the same manner? For the Creator was the same, and the material was almost interminable, from which every distinctive quality whatever was made. And why, when there were so many parts of a man, did not God make the woman out of some other part, rather than out of one of his ribs? Again, of which rib did he make her? And this question would hold even if we were to say that he had only spoken of 2 ribs. But in truth he has not specified their number. Was it then the right rib or the left rib? Again, if he filled up the place of the other with flesh, was not the one which he left also made of flesh? And indeed our ribs are like sisters, and akin in all their parts, and they consist of flesh. What then are we to say? Ordinary custom calls the ribs the strength of a man. For we say that a man has ribs, which is equivalent to saying that he has vigor, and we say that a wrestler is a man with strong ribs, when we mean to express that he is strong. And we say that a harp player has ribs, instead of saying that he has energy and power in his singing. Now that this has been premised, we must also say that the mind, while naked and free from the entanglement of the body, for our present discussion is about the mind, while it is as yet entangled in nothing, has many powers, namely the possessive power, the progenitive power, the power of the soul, the power of reason, the power of comprehension, and part of others innumerable both in their genus and species. Now the possessive power is common to it with other inanimate things, with stocks and stones, and it is shared by the things in us which are like stones, namely by our bones, and natural power extends also over plants. And there are parts in us which have some resemblance to plants, namely our nails and our hair. And nature is a habit already put in motion, but the soul is a habit which has taken to itself, in addition, imagination and impetuosity. And this power also is possessed by man in common with the irrational animals. And our mind has something analogous to the soul of an irrational animal. To be continued in the next video.